Good afternoon, and welcome to the 12th edition of the EQ Lunch and Learn series. My name is Mucha Mlingo. I am your host, and I am delighted to be here this afternoon for this conversation that we are about to have. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for being online with us. A big shout out to our regular attendees, those of you who have been with us from the very first or who've been on several of our lunch and learns. And to those of you who are joining us for the first time, you are very welcome to. Really excited to have you with us. The emotional challenge has been steadily growing around the world. And amounts of pressure. They are stressed by the current situation, stressed by the impact of the pandemic, and stressed as they try and juggle their increased workloads. In this world of growing complexity, emotional intelligence, the ability to navigate those feelings, especially those that are, overwhelming, is an essential skill for all employees. Against this backdrop of the rising need for emotional intelligence, organizations are struggling to meet the demand. Leaders are constantly juggling multiple balls, trying to stay abreast of the lightning pace at which change occurs, and to manage the heightened volatility and increased uncertainty brought about by the pandemic. In addition to this, budgets have become constrained, and so the soft skills fall lower down the list of priorities. And so we recognize that there is a serious skills gap. Today's employees are armed with yesterday's tools, and they are frequently ill equipped to deal with the challenges that we're facing today as we continue to do battle with the coronavirus pandemic, and tomorrow, whatever the future, whatever life after COVID looks like. The EQ Lunch and Learn series aims to provide professionals with insights on how they can utilize emotional intelligence as a skill to successfully navigate the challenges and changes that they're facing. And today, our theme or our topic is the art of communication. It has been said that your ability as an individual, as a professional, to communicate effectively will be one of your greatest assets at work. Individuals who are able to communicate effectively with their colleagues, managers, and customers are able to build stronger relationships, to work more effectively with others, and to successfully navigate conflict. Effective communication involves knowing how to listen attentively. It is the ability to offer empathy, open-mindedness, and helpful feedback based on what you hear. And it is rooted in emotional intelligence competencies. I am really happy that I have two amazing guests with me here today. Allow me to introduce them to you as we kick off our session and this important conversation around how to be effective in our conversations. I will introduce or start off by introducing Wyclef Osoro. Wyclef is a Leo and a Sanguine that delights in the company of others and can talk for hours on end if he has good conversational company. And I can testify to this. He is married with three children, two girls aged 12 and 8, and a boy aged 5 years old. His purpose in life is making a positive difference in the life of anyone that he interacts with. He is a fitness enthusiast and loves running combined with strength training. And this has been a big focus in his life this year. He's passionate about children, actively teaching in Sabbath school for children below 5 years of age, and he's done this over the last 10 years. He is an HR practitioner who has been in the field for 16 years, working for various multinationals and local businesses in different industries, including manufacturing, banking, energy, real estate, construction, and aviation. He also serves as an independent, non executive director on the board of directors at Spire Bank. and he's served previously as a council member at IHRM. Welcome, welcome to Wycliffe, who is joining us today. And if you'd like to connect with him, please do find him on LinkedIn. Really happy to have you, Wycliffe. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for honoring our invitation to participate in the event. Awesome. With me as well today is a gentleman's affair. With me as well today, I have Felix Maringa. Felix is the current Deutsche Welle News junior correspondent in Nairobi. He has an experience that spans over 4 years in the media industry. His proficiencies range from TV production, reporting, news anchoring, features, and documentaries production. He has an eye for detail when it comes to communication and believes that communication is the bridge between the problems we face as a continent today and the solutions ahead. Maringa aspires to work around the clock in ensuring that his journalistic works inform policy change and as a result have a long-term impact on humanity. Pen, paper, and camera equals impact. I love the way that he says that. Felix, you're really welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really delighted to have you as part of this conversation and looking forward to your insights, especially as one who has a background in the space or in the area around communication. Thank you for joining us, Felix.
Yes, okay.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Great to have you on. And if you'd like to connect with Felix, you can find him online on LinkedIn and you can connect with him there. So for those of you who are here for the first time, we will kick off the session with some questions that will go to our panel. And thereafter, we will open it up for questions from our audience. You're very welcome, whether you are with us on our Facebook page, on LinkedIn, or indeed following on YouTube. Do share your comments, do share your thought, reflection, and we will continue to engage with you. I have to wait until the time when we come to the Q&A. If you have any questions, feel free, even as we go along. So let's dive in. And Felix, I'd like to start with you, if you don't mind, as we kick off our conversation. I'd like to start with you as we talk about communication. It's been said, and I mentioned this earlier, that communication or the ability to communicate effectively or otherwise will be an individual's greatest strength or biggest weakness. Would you agree with this statement? And why would you say yay or nay?
Mucha, I'm delighted to be part and parcel of this conversation, and it's such an amazing thing that we are talking about the art of communication. So yes, I'd actually say it is one of the greatest tools that an individual can have when it comes to communicating, because once you know what you need to communicate, how you need to communicate it, and put the necessary strategies in place for you to be able to communicate and for you to be able to churn out a particular piece of information, then it becomes very easy for you guys to get to understand what it is that people want to communicate and how that message is actually received. There's also the question of two-way communication. I remember back in campus, we had this onion model of communication where we were being told there's the upper layer of communication and then there's now the inner level of communication. So at any given point, when you're just having communication on the surface, then you may not necessarily get to communicate what you intended to communicate. But when communication gets to the inner core of whatever it is that you want to communicate, then it becomes very easy for your message to be understood. And if there's any action that you had intended that particular message, or people act on that particular message, then it becomes very simple for people to act on that particular message because they got the communication, it landed on as you had intended, and it becomes very easy for you now to be able to engage.
I like that point you made, that it landed as you had intended, because
Yes.
oftentimes that is not the case, right? We
Yeah.
communicate, but actually what we had intended isn't what is received. Wycliffe, let me come to you on the same point. This idea that the ability to communicate effectively is crucial, a great strength. Would you agree with that statement? And why would you agree?
Yes, so thanks, Mucha, again for inviting me on this forum to speak today. And I think life is all about communication. That's what I would say. And so I fully agree with it, that for you to communicate effectively, it is a great strength. If you're not able to communicate effectively, then that becomes a challenge. Communication creates relationships. Communication, people are comfortable around people who communicate very well. And I know even certain opportunities in life, in your career, all that, they are gotten because you are able to communicate effectively. So I very much agree that if you're unable to communicate effectively, then you have a challenge. And I think Felix has alluded to what to communicating effectively and what that means. When I look at communication, communication is what you're saying, and I think a definition of it you can say is the act and process of using words, sounds, signs, and behaviors to express or exchange information. So when you do that, there's something that you intend the other party to hear. And for you to communicate effectively, it means that what you intended is what the other party deduced or got out of your communication. That is when you're communicating effectively. So if you're able to do that, then life becomes much easier. You're able to get that spouse that you're looking for. You're able to get that job. You're able to get many things. You're able to get that business deal. So there's a lot of things that can happen with effective communication.
Yeah. I like that. I like that. A lot of things can happen as a result of effective communication. And I think what I'm hearing both of you say is that the communication only really then is effective once the message that you had intended is received the way you had intended. So if that is not the case, if there is a mismatch between what it is you shared and how it is received, then in essence, the communication is not effective. And I think that's a really important point. Big shout out to, I can see we have a comment that has come through from one of our guests, Nyevu Carissa. Great to have you online. Nyevu says the coaching and learning the skills of effective communication is my passion. I look forward to being enlightened. And Nyevu says from less stress communication. I love it. Thank you very much for being with us today, Nyevu. And for those of you who are with us online, do just give us a shout out so we can say hi back. And continue to share your thoughts as we have this conversation. Wycliffe, let me stay with you as we continue in our conversation. As a seasoned HR practitioner, have you seen instances where the inability to communicate effectively has actually negatively impacted career growth?
Oh, yes, definitely. I've seen that in instances where individuals have missed out on opportunities just because of the way they communicate. Of course, the first place where ability to communicate well is important is in an interview. And if you're not able to articulate your achievements, articulate what you've done, where you've worked, what impact you've had in the things that you've done, then that already is a career blocker. So you're unable to get past that stage. And interviews do happen even within organizations. So when you're looking at growing yourself within the organization, so where people have been unable to communicate effectively, it has been a challenge. The other thing around communicating effectively is leaders, especially people who are managing teams and need to deliver through others. When they're unable to communicate effectively, then you find a team that is not able to perform well, and it impacts on the way the team is able to meet its objectives. So someone who's not able to communicate effectively as a leader then would have a challenge growing and taking up greater responsibilities within the organization. So if I look at it, it's very important for one to be able to articulate themselves, in terms of even when you're seeking that growth with your manager or with your leaders, you need to be able to articulate what it is that you want. What's the direction that you want your career to grow, and give good reasons on why you should be able to be considered for that growth trajectory that you're looking at. So I think it's very important, and I've seen it. I've seen instances where people say, you know what, if we put this guy in that team, then there's going to be a challenge, because he's not able to communicate, or she's not able to communicate effectively, and then the team will not be able to make it. Part of it are even certain roles, say for example, sales roles, or where you're reaching out to external parties. It's very important that someone is able to do that, and that will affect whether this person grows or not within their career. So I think that's what I would say. I think I could go on and on and on about examples, but I think even within written communication, for example, how do you communicate on email? We write emails amongst each other. How are you able to pass messages within the organization, outside the organization? That can actually impact how you will grow in your career.
I like that. I like that. I think that it's it's really important to note that your ability to communicate effectively can actually have an impact on your career and can limit you from moving forward. And you've made a really important point, Wycliffe, where conversations are being had about promotion, and the feedback is, well, if we put this person in that team, it's going to be a challenge, and that could be solely because of an individual's inability to communicate effectively and make sure that they get their message across. Felix, how has how we communicate been impacted by the pandemic? We've been going through this pandemic that I know we all thought would last about 3 months, and then the 3 months became 6, and the 6 months became a year. And I don't think any of us believed it last year if we were told that we'd come to the end of 2021 still battling the pandemic. How has this impacted how we communicate? At work. Yeah, how has this impacted how we communicate?
First and foremost, I think the pandemic was so unfortunate because it just came and landed, and we kept being told, oh, after 60 days we'll review this, after 90 days we'll review this. And so most of the organizations actually set their communication within particular deadlines, that this is how we will communicate moving forward for the next 30 days. And I think when organizations also started realizing, oh, this pandemic or these curfews or restrictions are not actually ending, then they started adopting, of course, tools like Zoom, Google Meet came on board, StreamYard, amongst other communication platforms. And this now impacted really, because initially people used to communicate in person. If you needed any particular piece of information passed across, you'd get people in a meeting or in a boardroom and communicate, and you're able to get feedback. But when now it became the issue where now people have to communicate via the different social platforms that we have, then even the issue of instantaneous feedback disappeared. So that now you can even write an email and you have to wait for feedback that you don't know at what particular point that feedback would come. And at times you actually need very quick approvals. Like in the media industry, if you delay on a particular, let's say you are supposed to conduct a particular interview, or you are supposed to maybe interview a particular guest, and
Yes.
you have probably booked them at 12 noon, and maybe they have internet connectivity issues at home, or maybe the lights go off. Now you cannot be able to get in touch with them, and maybe they needed to pass across such an important message. You see, so part of how communication again was impacted is we moved from individual communication to now you have to rely on particular platforms to be able to communicate. And these platforms are not standalone platforms, because even if, yes, somebody would say, you have your mobile phone, you can be able to maybe conduct an interview. You'd be in the middle of an interview, and then maybe a friend of yours sees you on TV and they call, hi, Mucha, I've seen you on TV. You see? And now it became such a tedious thing. Or we've also seen where people are at home, they're having Zoom meetings. Maybe it's a cabinet secretary or maybe a high-end person, and then all of a sudden the kid comes running to you, "Hi, daddy." You see, so what the pandemic did is that it brought in so many barriers to how communication was done, and it impacted largely the issue of immediate feedback. So that even when you're in an office setup, you'll have to wait for so many people to actually log into a particular time. And if you're not able to get them at that particular time, then one, you may not be able to get consensus moving forward on a particular issue that probably you're working on. If it's a project that you had actually decided that you're starting or you're picking up, you may not be able to pick it up as soon as possible because there's barrier in communication. There's a lot of things that actually don't get to happen. But in equal measure, it expanded the scope in that Mucha can be in Nairobi today, Osoro could be in UK, Felix is in a different place, and we are all able to connect at a particular given time. So on that particular bit, it became an advantage. But on the bit where you do not have immediate feedback, then I think it kind of impacted negatively on how people get to communicate and how feedback is actually received.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Felix. If I stay with you a little, just expanding this thought about how we have been impacted by the pandemic, just thinking about those changes you've talked about, what is just quickly, some of the advice you would give someone, especially maybe someone who is a little reticent or to use technology, but just quickly, what are some of your thoughts in terms of looking ahead? Because I'd imagine, and Felix, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'd imagine that a lot of the changes we've seen in how we communicate are here to stay. So what advice would you give as we look ahead to life, even post the pandemic, knowing what we know now about how we communicate?
I think the first thing first, I'd actually say technology is here with us. It's here to stay and it's not going anywhere. And not unless people now adapt. You see, like this example that is given in corporate spaces where Nokia used to be the in thing. When you had a Nokia 3310 back in the day, you knew you had the phone. Until they refused to move into Android and everybody else just came and bypassed them. And today, when you have a Nokia phone, it's just any other phone, you see. But it's the whole issue of adaptation. So technology is here with us. It's here to stay. It's not going nowhere. So we actually now have to adapt and know, okay, now that technology is here with us, how responsibly do we now make the better use of that particular technology to ensure that we are able to communicate effectively? So, and I think the very basic, it's because of these social sites, most of the time you find that people don't have specific timelines or specific objectives when they get into a social space or when a particular communication is supposed to be done. So I think even planning on what will be discussed, setting particular objectives for that particular communication, and now putting in the necessary strategies to ensure that if you're needed at a particular time, at a particular point, you're present and you have all the backups you need. If maybe you're using a mobile phone, you have maybe your power bank with you. If maybe you're fearing that maybe the lights could go off and you could run out of Wi-Fi, maybe you have enough mobile data, or if you have your portable Wi-Fi with you. The basic life hacks, really, because at the end of the day, you cannot say that you will be at a particular place every other day. See, at times, maybe you're on transit and you need to communicate something, or maybe you need to get into a quick meeting and you have to be in a place where you're able to connect. So I think adapting to the changes that are taking place and equipping yourself with the basic things. You see, right now, having a power bank is like, it's a necessity. You see, it's like how we say nowadays that having a car is no longer a luxury. You need to run to a place, you need to get there in time, you need to catch a particular meeting in time. So having a car is no longer a luxury. So having a thing like power bank, maybe having something like portable Wi-Fi that you can be able to communicate with whoever you need to communicate with, at specific time, I think that would go a long way in ensuring that you're not left out of particular communication, and you're also able to maybe participate in building up an organization.
I like that. And I like, Wycliffe, I want to come to you so that you can chime in on this conversation we're having. Firstly, about the change that we have seen as a result of the pandemic. And then secondly, what do we need to do in order to be able to embrace that change? What I heard you say clearly, Felix, is, this idea that we must adopt, we must, recognize that technology is here to stay. And actually, technology can be a great aid in how we communicate. Wycliffe, what are your thoughts on the same?
Good. Just to add a little bit to what Felix has said, I think in terms of the pandemic and the impact that it's had in communication, I know there's been little physical communication the way we were used to it. And what it has done is that it's led to loss of bonds within teams. So sometimes you meet a lot more frequently when you are meeting in the office physically, and now that is not happening. So even those physical, the bonds that you had, the feeling of teamwork, it becomes more difficult for you to be able to sort of get things done. In as much as you may meet frequently, regularly, it's not the same. It's slightly different. So that is something that really you have to work hard on. And what are the solutions, and what are some of the things that you can do is to do a lot more informal things during those meetings to sort of try and still create the bond that is there. I think the other thing is that, and coupled with that is that because meetings start on time, which is a positive thing. I think before the pandemic, a lot of times you would spend a lot of time waiting for people to get to the meeting point, and sometimes it's out of good reasons, like trying to make it through the Nairobi traffic. So that's something that would happen. So, of course, with that, it has made the meetings also be very impersonal and straight to the point, because you have specific minutes to have that conversation. So it's a 40 minutes limit on a Zoom meeting, for example, and we have to get everything done within that period. So that makes it very difficult. So what are the things that we can do to make communication better in this space? I've talked about, having some of those informal things. I see, say, for example, my wife and where they work, they have very interesting, even games, workout on camera, do a lot of those things that, sort of make it fun to still have the online presence, which is different from, you may not be doing some of those things in the office. So I think it's a very important thing to think of. How can we make it more human and move away from it just being the technology space? So those are some of the things that I think can be done. Of course, with more effective meetings, there's also been better productivity. So I think let's not just say that the pandemic has had negative impact. I think, like also Felix had said, it has had a positive impact. I hope that does answer the question, or there's something that I probably missed out. Remind me what it is that I may have missed out.
No worries, that sounds good. We'll continue with our conversation. If I just connect with those who are with us live, great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. Harry, good to see you again. Harry is one of our regular attendees. Happy to have you online. Gail, thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to your insights. And what I'd like to ask those who are with us is, how important is the ability to communicate to you? How have you invested in developing this skill? So I'd love to hear from you, those of you who are tuned in and listening and following us. Share with us, how important is the ability to communicate to you, and how have you invested in this skill? Before and as we see your thoughts and your contributions, we'll also ask the same question to the panel. But for the panel, I'll come back to this after, because I'd like to hear from our audience first. I want to ask, how can an individual determine how effective their ability to communicate is? So we're talking about effective communication, and I feel that communication is one of those things that we all assume we are very good at. right? I think we all assume that we are great at communicating. We all assume that we are effective at communicating. And yet, it's clear from some of the conflict that occurs in the workplace, and we're going to talk about managing conflicts a little later. But it's clear from the conflict that occurs in the workplace, from the misunderstandings that arise from, the work that, isn't completed the way it should. It's clear that communication isn't something that's just natural. It's like common sense. We say common sense is common, but we know it's not so common. So how then can an individual determine how effective their ability to communicate is? Wycliffe, I'd like to start with you. And why is this self-assessment important? Why is it important for me to really check in with myself to determine how well I communicate?
Okay, great. So there are different ways that you can be able to assess how effectively you feel that you're communicating. And I think one of the ways is that having a reflection. And I think earlier on I had mentioned that when you're communicating, to know that you're actually communicating effectively, you should look at what the output that you had expected from the party that you're communicating to. Is it what you had intended? So taking time to reflect and look at what it is that you have communicated and how you wanted the other party to, sort of decode that message that you had sent, helps you assess what it is, whether you're an effective communicator. The other thing that you can do is take time every day, sit down at the end of the day and reflect and say, this is what I said. And say, okay, what actions did I elicit from the people that I communicated with? Was it what I expected or not? If that is the case, then you're doing well in terms of your self-assessment. The other thing you can actually do is ask for feedback from the people that you're communicating with. Ask them, what is it that you've understood by what it is I have said? That helps you in the self-assessment. If every time that you communicate something and you ask someone, please tell me in your own words what you've understood, and they tell you something totally different from what you had said, then you know that you're having a challenge in terms of your communication. So that can help you assess really, and it's really important for you to be able to assess and improve your communication. Asking people how you made them feel, because sometimes communication is all about eliciting emotions from those who you communicate to. So finding out how you made them feel, you know what intention you had in terms of making that communication and how you wanted to make the other person feel. So if there's an alignment between those two, then I would say you're communicating effectively. And it's very important to be able to have that self-assessment, to be able to know whether you're doing well as an individual in terms of your communication.
I like that point, and I like this idea of I like the idea of ensuring that your communication is effective by actually checking in and clarifying that the message you have shared has been received appropriately. And I think it's important to note here that it's not always the other party's fault. If you find that you are looking back on your interaction with those you work with, perhaps, and there's always, or it always seems as though you are misunderstood and communicate, then perhaps you need to check in with yourself to determine if you are the reason, if your ability to communicate is actually what's causing the challenge. I think oftentimes we like to point the finger to others and imagine that others are the ones with the issue, and yet it could just be that we are not as effective as we ought to be in the way that we communicate. Wycliffe, I want to stay with you because we're talking about this idea of self-assessment and making sure that you connect with yourself to determine that you are communicating effectively. And you've shared how this self-assessment is important because it enables you to gauge where you are. So let's imagine, Wycliffe, that I do this self-assessment and I come to the realization that I'm not quite where I should be as far as my ability to communicate is concerned. What can I do about it? What steps can I take that would help me to communicate more effectively?
Okay, I think the steps that you can take to help you communicate once you have come to the realization that you're not being effective in your communication. I think there's a lot of tools or a lot of information that you can find online, courses that you can take to be able to understand whether you are communicating effectively. So that is one of the ways that you can be able to improve yourself. The other thing is, I always say in terms of being conscious about what your weakness is. So when you're communicating and you know you have a certain weakness, you should inform the other party and say, you know what, sometimes I tend to increase my volume as I'm talking to you. That should not mean that I'm angry with you, but just let me know that that is happening and I'll be able to adjust this, or just so that someone is aware. So working with people and being conscious about what your challenges are is what I think is very important in terms of your ability to then communicate. So I think you need to be deliberate in finding ways to improve your communication. In certain aspects, if you know you're going to have a certain conversation and you want to practice it beforehand, get someone who you trust and tell them, this is what I want to communicate, this is what I want to say. What do you think? How do you think it comes out? And I've seen that even sometimes, say I want to do a written communication, I would check in with my colleagues, check in with my boss. This is what I want to do. What do you see in terms of it? So I think users use the learning that's available for you to do that, and also be conscious about what your challenge is and be able to talk about it even when you're communicating, so that people can be able to sort of flag you and tell you, yeah, you're doing what it is that you actually have said that you want to avoid doing. Yeah, I think that's one
I
of
like that. I like that. I think that's really powerful. Thank you very much for sharing, Michael. I think that's really powerful. Nyevu is saying that the ability to communicate, to effectively communicate my thoughts and get my point across is very important. I have been a member of Toastmaster International for more than 10 years, a platform where I enhance my skills. And so, really, to your point, Wycliffe, there are so many opportunities out there, be it online learning, be it platforms like Toastmasters that allow you to practice your skills. And I like the point you made, Wycliffe, that we can also sharpen our skills with the support of those around us, being open to feedback from others. And so, where you have identified that you have a particular challenge as far as communication is concerned, you're then able to, ask those around you to support you in developing that skill. So the example you gave, where someone has a tendency to raise their voice, letting people know so that they can give you that feedback even in the moment. And I think that's really key. And I like that. I like that idea. The idea that I have the power to leverage those around me to be able to support me in doing better. Felix, your thoughts on this idea that we can invest in our ability to communicate because it is a skill? Would you add anything to what Wycliffe had said about how individuals can, strengthen that skill? And Felix, I'd like you to really also, speak to the young person out there, because the young person out there who may feel that this is not necessarily something that's so important for me to consider, something so important for me to worry about. People should take me as I am. How I communicate is fine. I shouldn't really have to change myself or change how I communicate. I'd like you to speak to that individual today as you share some ways that we can strengthen this skill. Felix, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's part of communication. Okay, so so
We're reading lips.
Yes. So I think from what Wycliffe shared, and I love the fact that he said people need to actually expand their knowledge in whatever spaces there are and take advantage of any opportunities that there are to actually improve on their communication. So whether it's reading books, whether it's signing up for Toastmasters, I've actually attended a number of sessions with the Toastmasters International, and they have some really nice sessions. And when you listen to how people have packaged their information, you're like, oh, wow. Martin Luther King still exists in several faces within the country, and you just get to see how much more can be done if people took time to actually develop that skill, either by reading or even by interacting with people who are in those particular spaces, and you're looking up to them to just walk in their feet, or even if not walk in their feet, but really just get to learn a thing or two from them. The thing about young people and why they actually need, or why we as the young people, let me stop pointing fingers, but why we as the young people actually need to adopt professional communication or effective communication skills. It's because, one, we exist in different spaces. There are those people who exist either in professional spaces, some other people are self-employed, and other people are either in organizations or even within school setup, and you're dealing with a diverse range of people. So when you start saying that, as a young person, let nobody determine what I'm supposed to do, let nobody dictate how I'm supposed to communicate. Oh, sorry, you'll get to Wycliffe's office and he'll tell you, you know, Felix, I'm the HR in this company, and this is how we do our thing. You see, and not just for the sake of even the bosses who might be looking, but even for you as an individual, there's the bit of growth where you actually now need to, the growth curve that you actually need to chart a path for yourself. And I think the one thing that I'd say for the young people, communicating effectively is the only thing that will make a difference. When you look at even the society out here, there's so many people who have different credentials. Either people have graduated with master's degrees, PhDs, and things like that. And all of us are looking for the same opportunities that are out here. You see, so if on an annual basis, 50,000 graduates are coming out of our universities, or are being churned out of our universities, and all of them are looking for the less than 5,000 opportunities that are there. So there is 45,000 people who the only thing that will help them is how effective they're able to communicate, how effective they're able to put up their ideas. And that does not mean that somebody is actually picking a rod and telling you, no, you know, Mucha, you're supposed to communicate like this. No. They're just telling you, hey, you know what? You need to acknowledge that you exist in particular professional spaces. And in those particular spaces, there is the set way of communication. And this is how people do their thing. So if you're a young lawyer, there is how young lawyers need to communicate, or there's how lawyers need to communicate. So you need to learn. If it needs you to sit down and watch some of the debates that they have, whether on YouTube or in whatever spaces, sit down and learn. At the end of the day, if you're able to communicate effectively as a young person, it's for your own advantage. You see, and as Wycliffe was saying, effective communication goes a long way. It can even help you get a spouse that you are not supposed to get just because you communicated effectively. You see, so if you're not able to communicate effective as a young person, then some of the opportunities you might end up missing out on them. But also something else, I think there's also a bit of follow-up, that a particular communication was done and you feel like, I'll be pestering these people if I keep asking them because I didn't understand. And I'd say the advantage you have with being a young person is that people will be like, these young people keep disturbing, but let me just give them feedback because they are young people. You see, but imagine somebody like Wycliffe. I'm not saying he's very old, but he keeps asking the same question over and over again. People will be like, no, who taught you? Where did you study? You see, but as a young person, you have that advantage. So I'd say as young people, we have the advantage that, yes, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong the first time. It's okay to be wrong even the second time. It's okay for you to keep asking until you get it right. And I think that's the only advantage that we have as young people, even when it comes to communicating. Like, yes, there is that opportunity for you to be wrong, for you to maybe communicate something wrongly and say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that's how it's supposed to be communicated, but I'm willing to learn the ropes. And even that vulnerability to actually accept that you didn't communicate as you were supposed to communicate, but moving forward, you're willing to either improve on your communication or improve in how you put out your words or your interest, then it goes a long way in ensuring that as a young person, you're also able to gain some of the opportunities that are out here. And I think Wycliffe would be very categorical, say, guys, when you come to my meetings, you need to tell us exactly what are your objectives, what do you want to achieve for the company, and things like that. That's where you come in as a young person and say, okay, fine, I didn't know. So can I sit under you and learn? And you see, some of these people, even in professional spaces, they actually appreciate when you come to them and tell them, hi, Mucha, I'm sorry, I didn't get that. I need to learn. I need to sit under you and understand what there needs to be done moving forward. So I think the advantage we have as young people is that bit where you can get it wrong again, but people won't judge you because they think you're still young. And that's the advantage or the leverage that we have.
I love that. I love that. Wycliffe, I'm not sure if it's those few gray hairs I see in your beard. Felix to say how he said it, but I think he's spot on. And I'm sure, Wycliffe, you can jump in and agree with him that when a young person asks for clarity, asks for you to explain again, you are always so open to give more advice, to support in their learning and development. And I think that is a very big advantage that young people have. Wycliffe, your thoughts on that?
No, first of all, I do not qualify for youth fund in Kenya, so definitely I don't qualify as a young person. I think youth is up to the age of 35, though we have politicians who are in their 70s and they feel that they're still young. So in that context, I am young. But I think what Felix has said is very important. And a lot of times, young people want to keep quiet, not knowing the advantage that they have. Because of the lack of experience, when you express what it is that you don't understand, then you will have your seniors or people who you're working with more willing and able to help guide you and show you the ropes. The challenge is when you feel that you know everything and you say, I'm fresh out of school, and sometimes we have some of that attitude and we say, I'm really brilliant and sharp, I know everything, and so I don't require any assistance. But it's good to actually recognize those who have had much more experience than you, and be able to articulate yourself in a way that you can be able to get the best out of them. I think that's something that's very important. But Felix has said quite a bit, and I think I fully agree with what he said. I wouldn't want to pour water on his comments.
Fantastic. Yeah. Just following on from this idea that, as a young person, there is the, space to ask and explore and to keep asking and get help so you can develop your skills, because yes, there may be that which you bring to the table, but there's so much more that you can learn. I'd like to, follow that thread and talk about the link between your ability to communicate effectively and your ability to influence. So let's stay with you, Wycliffe, and just talk about this a little. So this is now not just talking about young people, but just in general. What is the link between the ability to communicate effectively and the ability to influence, especially influencing upwards?
Okay. So I think in terms of ability to influence and communication, there's a very close connection to that. When you're able to communicate effectively, then you're able to influence. In terms of when you're having conversations, especially upwards, a lot of times I always say when you're dealing with leaders in the business, they have a lot of things that they need to think about. They have a lot of things on their mind, and they may just grant you an opportunity to be able to articulate what it is that you need to do. So if you're not able to take take that short moment of time to be able to express what it is that you're doing, or what it is that you would want, then it becomes very difficult to influence your superiors. So you need to be able to, when I would love to talk to someone who, anytime they come to me and they want to express something, it's very clear what it is they would want, how I can help, or what it is that they're seeking. So you'd love to be around such individuals, and that way, I would how do I call that ability to influence? When this individual is speaking to me, I would give them my ear, and I would consider a lot of things that they would want done. So that means they're influencing me by the way that they communicate, because they've been able to communicate effectively. I think it's as simple as that. You're able to take advantage of that, especially when it's upwards, because there's a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of different people that your manager may need to deal with. So you should be able to know that if you're able to communicate effectively, then you're able to influence. And a lot of times you'll even find that the managers will want to even communicate through you and use you to communicate to others because you're able to communicate effectively. So that's how you even develop that power and influence around yourself.
I love that. Thank you very much. And I think Chris is in agreement with you.
Yes.
Chris says those who listen to you are vulnerable to your ideas, and that's how influence happens. Great to have you on with us, Chris. Thank you very much for joining us today. Chris is a former panelist on this show. So great to have you back with us again. And so, yes, as you've said, Wycliffe, that just the mere fact that you're getting your message across is opening up opportunities for you to influence the individual you're interacting with. And I like the point you made that as you continue to build that relationship and influence in that space, they then see you as a person of influence even amongst your peers. So that raises your esteem in their sight. Felix, let me come to you and really on the same point. What is the relationship between effective communication and influence? How does my ability to communicate effectively help me to actually begin to influence upwards those around me and my environment? You're muted again.
So allow me to start from my practice as a journalist. Anytime we are doing a piece, maybe it's a somber mood, we are reporting about deaths or something like that, you won't come with all this bubbly voice and something like that. You'll come and communicate or narrate your piece in such a way that it shows empathy. And in that way, you're able to get people to actually follow through because you're empathetic of a particular situation. You're sympathizing with whatever has happened to the people that you're reporting about, and you're like, guys, you know what? I'm also part and parcel of this. And I think the highest bit of influence when it comes to communication is when people can actually feel like you're one with them. You see, so you saw, I think in the build-up, I love politics, and there's a lot that happens in the political spaces when these people want to influence. You saw when Barack Obama came to Kenya in 2015, the first word that he started with was Niajeni Wase, and that got every Kenyan just celebrating, and they were like, oh, finally, this Mzungu knows Kiswahili. You see, because people people thought he's one with us. You see, when let's say Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto were campaigning in the build-up to 2017, they'd call themselves the digital generation. And you saw how much that helped them either in 2013 and in 2017. You've also seen the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga going to different spaces, and when he gets maybe he's going to pray with the Islam community during Eid celebrations, you see him in a white robe and a white hat, and basically he's just telling them, you know, guys, I'm just one of you. You see, and that really works when it comes to communication. When people can feel that this person is one with us, then it becomes very simple for them to actually buy into your idea. And the reason as to why, again, people, I know you've been in these online spaces and you've seen people put some particular quote with heavy words and they write PLO Lumumba there because they just think this man is such a complex character and they feel like this man is just in his own world, you see. But when it comes to communication, you need to communicate in very simple terms in such a way that it gets conversational. That even if like one of the rules that we have as journalists is communicate like you're communicating to a 4-year-old, that there was fire in Nairobi. This is what happened. You see, so if a 4-year-old is able to understand whatever you're communicating, then even a 90-year-old is able to understand. But when you start communicating and you're communicating to the 90-year-old, then the 4-year-old may not be able to understand. So maybe before 2020 and 2021, if if you're supposed to communicate about curfew to young people, you'd have started saying curfew is when a government puts particular restrictions to people because of ABCD. But right now, when you're communicating about curfew, simply because everyone knows what curfew is, then you're able to now tell them curfew, and people quickly get you talking about particular restrictions. You see, and again, I'm just picking these particular examples that we are able to also just get in the group. When again the pandemic began, you saw very small kids. Like my sister has small kids, and we play a lot when I visit them or when they come visiting at home. And there's a particular instance I went to deliver something at my sister's place, and the kids were like, "No, uncle, sanitize." I'm like, "You guys, you're not even in grade 1. Why are you telling me to sanitize?" But it's because that is what they've been taught at this particular point. And if that particular kid knows what sanitizing is, then when you come and talk to them about sanitization, then becomes a very simple thing for you to be able to gel with them. So, and when it comes to now influence in how you communicate, it's now these particular bits of things. Obama saying near Jenny, and people feel, oh, this person is finally communicating our language. And now they are able to work with you because they feel, okay, Mocha is actually communicating our language, so we can actually get to gel with them. Again, the other thing with how you get to influence people when you're communicating to them is also your tonal variation. Something as simple as what Wycliffe was mentioning. Somebody comes to the office and they shout at you and they're like, "Oh, boss, wait. Actually, here we do not shout. We just communicate. So can we communicate?" You see, things like facial expression, like you're talking to people and you're looking straight to their faces and you're telling them, "You know, guys, this is the situation we are in as a company." I remember before I joined DW, I was working for Standard Media Group, and at some point, the HR had to actually slash our salaries because the pandemic had hit. I think everybody within the media space understands that, and you saw people in different spaces. Even when HR came to communicate such a piece of information, they were like, "Guys, we are all together in this. Yes, you know, HR is not together with you in this, but you, by the fact I see Wycliffe refusing. Wycliffe is
No, I will explain, but anyway, keep going.
yeah. So, so when HR comes and tells you, you know, we are together in this, this has really affected business, and we need to actually keep the business going. So even in how he explains, you see, if he came and told you, "Guys, you know what, the company is not making profits, we need to slash your salaries," you're like, "No, that's against our employment rights and things like that." But when they come and tell you, "This is happening, we are together in this pandemic has affected all sectors, and soon we'll be out of this," you feel, okay, fine, this is speaking to the heart. You see, so when you want to influence people at any level, whether you're making presentations at an international space or even the local space, even in your local church, when the pastor comes, they can't come and start asking you guys, you guys have been paid salary, you now need to pay tithe. Anakujanga nawaambia, tithe is for the Lord. We are helping the house. You see, so there are particular bits that you need to also weave into your communication for you to be able to get people to work with you, and for people to be able to buy into your ideologies.
Before I allow Wycliffe to jump in and
Yes.
share his thoughts on some of what you've said, I think
Yes.
what I'm hearing from you is this idea that to influence, we must communicate and connect at the heart level. We must connect where people are, which means that if I'm looking to influence upwards, I need to understand those individuals that I'm communicating with, understand where they are, understand what their pain points are, understand what's important to them, and then tailor my communication so that it meets them where they are, and I'm more likely to begin to influence. And I think this then becomes the challenge we face when we have an approach that says, well, this is who I am, this is how I communicate, take it or leave it. And in essence, that then really hinders your ability to connect fully with others. Chris has shared a comment here that I think is so right on point, that I have often said that we are all one speech away from unlocking our greatest possibilities. And so our ability to communicate really does make a big difference. Wycliffe, would you like to just contribute to this thought, or give an additional contribution as we're talking about communication and influence? And I think this is something that's really, really important, because all of us have a need to influence in the spaces where we exist.
Good. First, let me say that HR is always with the people, and I like what Felix did say. I mean, having gone through a similar experience last year, it's how you connect to the hearts of those who are getting impacted by whatever is happening around the organization. And I think a lot of times people assume that HR is not for the people, but HR is people advocates, and it probably is the difference that made between the 80% cut and 50% cut. So I think there's a lot of discussions that do happen behind the scenes, and of course, in as much as HR practitioners have to worry about the business, they also worry about the people. So it's good to also just be clear around that. I think Mucha, just as I was defending my profession, something that also went out of the window. So it was around the influence, and you had wanted me to add something around. Sorry, you're on mute.
Oh.
If you can just come around, was it around the ability to influence?
Yeah, so it was just
no,
I just wanted to know if you had any other reflections on, because you'd already spoken a bit about it. I just wanted to know if you had any other reflections on this idea, because I think it's such an important point, that one of the reasons why effective communication is so important for your career is because when you are able to communicate effectively, you are more likely to influencing upwards, influencing across, influencing downwards, influencing in your community. So I was just asking, before we moved on, if you had any other contribution that you would make as far as influence is concerned.
Yeah, I think the influence, I don't know, probably talk a little bit more around this, is really also how it connects with emotional intelligence. I think that's where I would look at it. Knowing what to say and when to say it. That's something that's very important. You need to pick the right moment to say certain things. You need to read the mood to be able to communicate. So that also is an aspect that affects your ability to influence. And knowing when to talk, who to talk to, sometimes even within the organization, there's a sequence in which you would want to have a conversation so that you can be able to achieve what it is that you want to do. So when you're talking about influence, you need to know, who do I need to talk to first? Who then do I move to? So that once this message is aligned with this individual, so I know that once I get to person X, then the ground has been prepared for me. Because you know that they're going to speak and they're going to influence each other. So once I have this person on and their thoughts with me, then I'm able to influence. So also knowing that sequence in which to follow and who to speak to first, who to reach out to, who is going to bounce out the ideas to you before you get to the final person that you would like to influence, I think is important. And sometimes when you're talking about some of us in our profession, you're not just influencing one person, but you're influencing the entire organization and creating a certain culture. So you need to know who are the key people that you need to, sort of influence and, speak to and articulate the communication to, because you know that if they don't get it correctly, then it is going to influence your communication across everyone else. Because if there's a miscommunication to them, then you will work very hard to try and turn around that miscommunication.
Savage.
So I think that's what I would want to say.
And actually, something else, Mucha, when you're talking about even how you communicate upwards, I was just thinking about when Mark Zuckerberg needed to go and defend Facebook in Parliament. We are used to Mark Zuckerberg in a t-shirt, in jeans, and in some rubbers. But when he was called to Parliament, because he knew these particular people hold the keys to my company's existence or my company's failure, for the first time, people world over saw Mark Zuckerberg in a suit, you see, and that also now determined how his communication to Parliament was going to be. So yes, we are used to seeing Mark Zuckerberg behind the scene, but at that particular point, there are instances where you actually need to step up. So if you need to communicate maybe to people who are higher in ranks, or maybe as a young person, you just started your business, you need to pitch to a particular cadre of people in the society for them to invest in your business, address them as that. You see, package your information in that particular sense so that they are able to also now buy into your idea. Maybe you're going to communicate to young people in campus. Garissa University experienced a horrific thing some time back, and you're going to talk to those particular students. You're going there to really empathize with them and tell them, hey, you know what? We are actually with you together in this, and this. It's a sad thing that is actually taking place. And being able to actually package your information in that particular light helps you also now be able to do business in terms of communication, you see. And the one thing that people need to also understand is communication is a business on its own. If you communicate well, then you're able to also earn from it, and people will be like, oh, okay, so this person is actually, and it's just the simple thing. This guy from the US, I think he's called Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins, I think, something like that. He just his role is to just make speeches. We also, Dr. Miles Monroe, he was able to do 1,000,001 things, and he was just coming and talking to people about purpose, and people knew him for that. So also how consistent you can be with a particular message, and when you decide to angle yourself in a particular light, just take that and die with it, like defend it with your last breath, in such a way that, I came and pitched this business to Wycliffe, and I know he will buy it. And if he does not buy it today, tomorrow I'm back to it, and I'll package the information in a different way, but the same communication. Yeah. So I think that particular bit of also packaging your information to particular levels of people within the society is able to also give you access to places that initially you wouldn't be given access.
I love the conversation we're having, and I'm looking at the time and it's just flying by, and we could spend the rest of the time we have just talking about influence. But I want us to move a little, and perhaps we'll have a lunch and learn that's just about influence, right? Because I think that's such an important topic. But I want us to move, Wycliffe, and have a conversation about managing conflict, because I think this is really important. There are those difficult conversations that you need to have, right? Those conversations where, someone has encroached on boundaries, someone has interacted with you in a way that you felt was not appropriate, your boss is being unreasonable. So there are those difficult conversations that we need to have. What advice can you give to someone who needs to have one of those difficult conversations and really does not quite know where to start, does not know how they can communicate effectively in order to navigate conflict or in order to deal with a difficult conversation? Wycliffe, what are your thoughts?
Good. So my thoughts on this matter around difficult conversations are this. I think one of the most important things is that you need to prepare for that conversation. When you're having a difficult conversation, you don't just walk into the conversation without preparation. So you need to take some time and look at it in terms of what is it that you would want to achieve in that conversation that you're having in that particular situation. So you need to prepare, and then you have to have a certain structure in terms of how you address that particular issue. So what are the things that you're going to look at? You're going to look at, one, what are the facts? A lot of times it's important for you to determine what are the facts in this conflict or in this situation that we're having. The second thing that you then look at is the emotions. How is it making you feel? And even when you're going to have that conversation, you need to use the I feel this way, so that you're not attacking the character that you're having the conflict with. So you're not saying, you do this, you make me feel this. I feel this. When you talk to me in this manner, this is what I feel. Or when, focus more on saying what your emotions and how your emotions are impacted rather than what the other person is doing. Then another thing that you can then put in that structure of the conversation that you're going to have is what is the way forward and what are your expectations? As in, coming from once you've made the facts known, how the feelings have been impacted or your feelings have been impacted, then what is the way forward? What are your expectations of what you want to happen after that? And after that, getting a commitment from this individual to tell you going forward, what is it that they commit to be able to turn around the situation. So I think that's a good guide to how you can have a difficult conversation or managing conflict when there is conflict. So key, prepare. Don't just walk in and you say, if there's something, I'm going to deal with this thing now. I have to tell you, step back. Chances are things may blow up and you not have actually thought about it. Or you might actually realize when you're going through the facts and all that, that really you're the one who's making a big deal out of nothing. So and I think that opportunity to reflect helps you cool down, helps you manage those difficult conversations. And whether it's upwards, sideways, whoever you're dealing with, I think that's a very good structure in how you can deal with difficult conversations.
I like that. Thank you very much, Wycliffe. I like especially the fact that you talked about understanding your emotions, understanding how you're feeling as you're going into that conversation. As someone who is all about emotions, I always say that emotions drive behavior. And oftentimes we don't realize that our emotions are fueling the way that we are communicating with those around us. And your emotions are powerful enough to override rational thinking, which means that you can find yourself getting carried away by your emotions and you won't get the ultimate objective that you want. I also like the point you made, Wycliffe, that go into the conversation with the end in mind, thinking about what it is you'd like to get out of this conversation. I think that is powerful. Felix, would you like to add anything on this idea of navigating challenging conversations or managing conflict?
Maybe I think when it just comes to mind, I think two things. One, you can, because it's a difficult conversation in itself, I think finding the right setting. You see, you wouldn't want to have a difficult conversation with people in a setting that does not allow for full closure to happen. You see, and because it's a difficult conversation, people just need to be as blunt as they can be. So you need to just find the right setting. Where is it that if we were to have this particular conversation, there'll be closure, and irrespective of whether it's communicating upwards or communicating across the board, people are able to communicate effectively. So I think finding the right setting would go a long way in ensuring that actually this particular communication gets to the person that it was intended to, and you guys are able to, like as Wycliffe is saying, get an end that you had in mind, come to that particular end in mind. I think the other thing that needs to actually take place is that the other party needs to also be confident that whatever it is that they talked with you will actually remain with you, you see. And this happens a lot when it's a conversation that you really wanted to have, but somebody does not trust that if we have this conversation with Wycliffe, wouldn't it be used against me when I go to ask for a pay hike? Or wouldn't it be used against me when maybe I want to leave the company and maybe they're like, no, but the last conversation you had with HR, you actually said that you are disappointed with how the company was treating its employees and things like that. So people want to actually know that, irrespective of whatever information that I actually share with you, I know that the only person who knows this information moving forward is just one person, and I don't expect that tomorrow I'd be hearing it with somebody else. Because, you know, today it could be a difficult conversation. Tomorrow, there could be an opportunity for an even more difficult conversation. So if somebody is not able to trust you with maybe a kind of difficult conversation, nobody will trust you with a more difficult kind of conversation. So yeah, just keeping it confidential and finding the right setting could go a long way. Plus, of course, whatever Wycliffe has been able to share with us.
Fantastic. I love that. I think we're having a fabulous conversation, and thank you very much for your thoughts. You spoke earlier, Wycliffe. You mentioned this a little, and you know we cannot possibly finish this conversation without going there. How does emotional intelligence help? How does emotional intelligence help us to be more effective in our communication? And Wycliffe, you touched on it a little earlier, but I'd like us to really zone in. And I'd like to ask this to both of you. Wycliffe, you can start, and then Felix. How does emotional intelligence help? As you're putting together your thoughts, just to shout out Victor, thank you so much for joining us. See your comments. Victor says, speak to a man in a language he understands and it goes to his head, but speak to a man in his own language and it goes to his heart. And Shurai says it's also important to consider the mood of the individual you want to speak to, and also check your own mood as well. And I think Shurai's point brings us perfectly into the conversation about emotional intelligence, because she says things can quickly spiral out of control if the moods of both parties aren't checked. Shurai is also a former panelist on this show. Thank you for joining us again, Shurai. So Wycliffe, how can emotional intelligence help?
Yes, so emotional intelligence is very important when communicating. And one of the things that I think about is empathy. Thinking about the other individual that you're communicating to. How is it that they're feeling? You know, trying to put yourself in that other person's shoes. So, for example, you're having a difficult conversation where, say, you're going to have a termination of employment, or you're going to have you need to let go of someone from the organization. At that point, just place yourself in the shoes of that individual, how they would be feeling, and communicate in a manner that you are conscious of that, and place yourself in their shoes and say, if this conversation was happening, how would I want it to happen to me? Does it leave me in a space that feels that I was valued, even if the decision that is happening is a very difficult one? That's something that I would think of. Emotional intelligence also helps you understand when you can bring up certain conversations. I think that I alluded to it before. Reading the mood of the room and being able to bring up conversations at the right time. The other thing about emotional intelligence is, I think, for example, if you start your conversation from a negative point of view, then you do not expect to have a positive outcome out of it. So sometimes people are, you come in with so much negative energy towards a conversation, and you are already judging what the people who you're communicating to are going to respond. So I think you just have to be conscious as an individual that, by the way, I don't need to be negative here. If I want to get something positive, acknowledge. Don't say that I'm the one who's always going to be negative on this. No, I think it's important with good emotional intelligence to be able to say, you know what, read the mood and be able to articulate your views without necessarily affecting the outcome that would come. The other thing that is important around emotional intelligence is understanding your head noise, your own particular head noise, what's happening within your head that is influencing this conversation. So sometimes we go into a conversation and we have a lot of head noise, and for someone who's very emotionally intelligent, they'll be able to know that this is affecting the way they're communicating and be able to sort of try and have this exercise to get rid of this head noise so that you can be able to communicate effectively. So the other thing is, of course, don't fake attention when you're having conversation. And this is more around listening actively. You need to be present when you're having conversations with individuals, because someone can actually see that you're not present in the communication. And I think that's all about emotional intelligence and communication. There's a lot that we can speak. I'm sure it's something that can be a whole topic on its own, but I think that's how it connects.
I love the statement you made, Wycliffe, that EQ helps you to deal with your head noise. I love that statement. And, I think it's really important because it helps you to connect with yourself so you can see where you are at and see how that can potentially impact how you communicate. Felix, let me come to you on the same question. How can emotional intelligence help us to communicate more effectively?
I think it goes to the whole question of what end you want or you have in mind when you want to put across particular communication. And Wycliffe has, of course, talked much about it. There's the whole idea that you have 2 ears and you have 1 mouth. So people want to feel like they're actually being listened to. You see, and most of the time, we are so preoccupied with wanting to have our point heard that we rarely get to understand what the other person would have wanted. You see, and so when you actually put yourself in that particular shoe, it's like this particular phrase. When back in school, you would be told, if you are walking the school field and you collected 500 shillings note, as a Christian, what would you do? You see. So it's the same thing. As an emotional intelligent person, what would you do if you met with somebody who was crying? Would you now start telling them, hey, I also, and again, we are coming through from a very particular phase where people have experienced loss, people have experienced a lot of negative things have actually happened in the past 1 year. And you don't want to be in that particular space where Felix really wants to be listened to, and you're here telling me about how Mother Teresa did what, how Martin Luther did. I don't want to listen to all of those things. I just want somebody who can sit there and listen to me, and I feel like this person actually understands what I'm saying. And even if you don't say a word, you can actually say, anyway, I sat down and Mocha actually listened to me, and I'm now able to even communicate with her better. You see, so the whole bit of listening, why you have 2 ears is because people need to feel like you're actually listening to them. And again, that also helps with back to the question of influence. Like, if I feel like you're listening to me, then it's so easy for you to influence me or me to influence you, just because I feel like we are actually on a particular place together, and there are particular standards that we put for ourselves together. But also when it comes to the question of emotional intelligence, again, it's just how you can be able to, back to our reporting style, communicate to a 4-year-old. A 4-year-old kid has come home saying, Daddy, I was beaten by my friend in school. I hate that school. Nini, nini, nini. And you're like, oh, yeah, I also hate schools where people are fought and everything. And this kid is supposed to go back to that same learning environment tomorrow and continue with their studies. So even as a parent, there are those particular things that you'll be like, oh, I'm so sorry that happened, we will address this particular issue. But when you get to the offensive and you're like, oh, I also hate schools where kids are fought, right? There is no school that kids do not fight, you see. So you also getting to also now understand that and helping the kid understand that, okay, maybe it was just a one-off instance, but it won't be happening on a daily basis, but I commit.
Yeah.
That commitment bit is where now the EQ comes in, because without commitment, you'll just be doing a lot of going around the circles and you're not getting to really get to the heart of this particular person. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Felix. I think, what you've both said really takes me to a point I like to make all the time, that, as an organization and as an individual, as an emotional intelligence coach, I truly believe that emotional intelligence is not just another skill that individuals, that professionals need to add to the plate, but it is the plate upon which all other skills reside. I think your ability to communicate effectively is really rooted in emotional intelligence. And you have just confirmed exactly that, which is why we have these series of conversations to showcase the fact that all these skills that we must develop as individuals so that we can be successful at work are rooted in EQ. Our time is up. I can't believe it's already 2 o'clock. So allow me to ask each of you to share your parting shot. What advice would you give as a next step for someone who's listened in? I don't think you can exhaust everything that there is to share about communication and being effective in how we communicate. But what is your parting shot? What advice would you give to someone who is listening in? Felix, a parting shot from you.
I think the whole act of communication is also taking responsibility in what you communicate, knowing that whatever information that you're communicating has the effect to either impact somebody's life positively or negatively, and it just borders on that particular bit, that as an individual, I'm responsible for whatever I'm communicating. I'm responsible for the information that I'm actually putting out. And you're telling people, you know what, people, this particular information that I'm putting out, it's not just a communication for the sake of it. It's not just any other speech that has been written or any other script that has been put together, but this represents the person I am. And when people feel that you're communicating with them genuinely, then they are able to plug into particular courses that you're actually either communicating to them, and you are able to achieve so much more. So back to that bit of, you just need to be very responsible with whatever you're communicating, but also ensure that people get to come on that particular bit of communication, or rather they get to join your bandwagon. And the only way they can join the bandwagon is when they feel Mucha is communicating on my behalf. Wycliffe is actually communicating this for the good of all of us and not just for his own good. So when people feel like this person is actually speaking our language, then they are easily able to get that piece of communication impacting their lives, and it goes a long way in making a difference. The last thing I'd say is that communication is a very good opportunity for people to be at their best. So anytime that you open your mouth to speak, anytime that you decide to go online and type something on your status, on your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, anything, just know that represents the person you are. So what kind of a person do you want people to associate you with? You see? And if people just go to my social media sites, they'll just find hashtag Maringa the Great on almost all my posts, because I believe I'm the only greatest Maringa that there'll ever be. So what kind of communication do you want people to understand you with? So yeah, that's it for me.
I think you're spot on, Felix, and this idea that we are our brand, and our brand is enhanced or detracted from by the way that we communicate, and especially on social media. So that's extremely important. Wycliffe, your parting shot as we wrap up our conversation.
Yes. So my parting shot is where I began. life is all about communication. Think about it. Communication creates relationships. People are very comfortable around people who can communicate well. But at the end of it, we need to really think about this. Communication is how best you're able to deliver the message to your target audience in a way that they will understand it the way you intended. So the thing that we must appreciate is you don't have control over how they will interpret it, but you have control over minimizing the gap that may be from how they interpret it to how you may interpret it. I know there's one area that we did not cover a lot in this conversation, which is about non-verbal communication. Communication is not just all about what we write, what we say, but there's non-verbal communication. It's how you communicate even when you're not speaking. So that needs to be something that a lot of us need to start thinking about. Am I communicating when I'm not communicating? I think Felix did talk about it when they're reading news. You know, how do you look when you're communicating a sad story? You can't be smiling and it's a sad story. So there's non-verbal communication is very key, and it needs to be in sync with the verbal communication they're having. Or even when you're not talking, people should be able to see what it is that you're communicating. But I think spend time to improve your communication, because it is something that's very important. It's something that will take you places. It influences, it opens doors, it grows your careers, it gets you your life partners, it gets you to different places. So I wish you all the best as you get onto this communication journey, and not to forget how your emotional intelligence is going to impact how you communicate with others. Thank you very much for this question.
Thank you, Wycliffe. And like you said, there's so much more that we could have said. I think communication is something that can take a whole 3 to 5 day training just on communication. And I like the fact that you've brought in that point about the non-verbal. And I've heard it said before that if there is a mismatch between the words coming out of your mouth and the non-verbal communication, the person you are engaging with will pick up on the non-verbal. So if you're saying with your mouth one thing, but your body language is saying another, what people take away is what your body language is saying, because we've been told before that over, I think 70% of communication is in the non-verbal. So you're right, the non-verbal is extremely important, and it's something to consider. And I think your final thought with your passing shot, Wycliffe, is really the underlying thought that we must invest in this skill. You must make the effort to read, to attend online programs, to join platforms that support your ability to communicate effectively, understanding that it could be your greatest strength or your biggest weakness. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for this conversation that we have had today.
One more thing, Mocha.
Yes, Felix, go ahead. Yes.
Just one more thing. I think as young people, we usually find the challenge of communicating the truth, and that becomes a really difficult particular bit. So there's just so much reward when you learn as an individual or as a young person. Just communicate the truth. You see, when you communicate the truth, it goes a long way to helping you even gain particular favors or gaining particular graces that previously you wouldn't have had. So even getting to communicate the truth. There's an author who said, when you communicate the truth, you don't have to struggle to remember it next time. But when you communicate a lie, you have to keep trying to remember, oh, what did I tell them last time? Did I tell them I was, yes, you see. But just communicate the truth. It will go a long way in helping you also master the art of communication. Thank you.
I like that. And I was actually thinking of that same comment, that idea that when you communicate truthfully, it's easy to keep track of what you said. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. A big shout out to both of you. Thank you very much, Wycliffe. Thank you very much, Felix. I think that we've had a great conversation. We may not have finished everything there is to talk about as far as communication is important, because it's a very big topic. But I think for me, there was a number of key takeaways that I have picked up from this conversation that we have had. I think the first takeaway is the idea that we must become self-reflective and really understand where we are as far as our ability to communicate is concerned. Don't assume that you are effective at communicating. Don't assume that, when you speak, people understand everything you are saying. So I think for me, that's one of the first takeaways that I have, that we must be more self-reflective and really do the work. And I think, Wycliffe, you identified a number of steps we can take that would help us to do that. A second thing that is a takeaway for me is the idea that we must communicate where people are, right? So we must tailor our communication, understand the person you're communicating with, and meet them where they are. You are more likely to communicate effectively when you are more empathic, connecting with someone where they are, and you're more likely to be able to influence when you're able to meet people where they are. The next thing that I learned is this idea that effective communication doesn't happen on the fly, especially when you're dealing with handling challenging conversations. And so take time to prepare. When you need to have that conversation that is challenging, when you're trying to navigate conflict, take time to prepare for the conversation in advance. And the last takeaway for me is just a reinforcement from the things that you both said, that emotional intelligence really is at the heart of our ability to communicate effectively. And, as I talk about the idea of emotional intelligence and how it is at the heart of our ability to communicate effectively, allow me, as we close, to invite you to our upcoming training, Unlock Potential with EQ. Research shows that there is a high correlation between emotional intelligence and better work performance, whether it is the ability to communicate effectively or the ability to influence or to really build strong and effective relationships, the ability to engage with customers and enhance the way that you deliver your service. All of these are influenced by your emotional intelligence. As a matter of fact, your IQ, it is said, only accounts for about 20% of your success at work and in life. Until I understood the importance of my emotions and understood the power that my emotions had on me and how my emotions impacted my behavior, I often held myself back without even realizing it. Honestly, it was a struggle for me until I finally learned that emotional intelligence is power, because it enables me to connect with my emotions and use them as a strategic resource. I truly believe emotional intelligence is a game changer. And I don't say these words lightly. In the 6 years that I've worked my EQ journey, and more especially over the last 1.5 years as we've been battling the pandemic, I have found that EQ is the most important thing for success at work. Just as we as an organization help a lot of professionals to understand the power that their emotions have over their behavior and how those very emotions can be holding them back at work, we'd like to extend an invitation so that we can help you to learn how you can use your emotions as a strategic resource. And so join me for the 4th edition of an amazing and transformational program called Unlock Potential with EQ. This online series will help you to learn how to stop operating on autopilot and build greater self-awareness to increase your impact and effectiveness at work. It will help you to develop the skills to use your emotions as a strategic resource to power up your career and achieve your career goals. And it will help you to build interpersonal awareness and strengthen professional relationships so that you can maximize your influence at work. If you want to learn more about this program, visit our website, www.pts.co.ke/UPEQ, and I'll be delighted to engage with you online. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We're very easy to find on social media. At PTS Africa is our handle across all platforms, across Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So reach out to us if you have any questions on that program, or you can just visit our website. Thank you so much for sharing your lunch with us this afternoon. I promise that you bring the lunch and we will bring the learning. And I think you can agree with me that we have delivered on our promise. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you diarize our next EQ Lunch and Learning. Our theme is a whole new world, as we look at how we are going to move forward in light of this pandemic. I'm really excited about that conversation. The last Wednesday in the month of September. I look forward to engaging with you. Thank you so much for sharing your time. Goodbye to you all and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.